All right, welcome to Satsang, everybody. It's the European edition, and it's October, and it's it's a beautiful thing. So um, I'm glad everybody is in the room. Um, so today I wanted to start off with a little bit of a story, and as we go along, you'll um, you'll have a little fun with this one. I think I'm going to go a little more into detail on this one because nothing is ever complete in my world unless you hear stories about my dogs. That's really a big deal in my life, and so everybody knows when I wrote my book, I had this big beautiful mastiff, and his name was Odie, and Odie was about 215 pounds. So in kilos, that's about 100 kilos. So he was a big dog, and he was a hilarious dog. He had a tongue that stuck out of his mouth. When he'd sleep on the carpet, he'd get little bits on his tongue, and he had one eye. He was born with one eye, and so he was just one of those kind of dogs, and he and I were incredibly close. I dedicated the book I wrote to him. There's a picture of me standing with him out on the train tracks. And so for some reason, it was probably the first dog in my life that was truly my dog. This dog, for some reason, my wife got her feelings hurt because she's kind of like the animal whisperer. And this is the first time an animal preferred me over her. So that we had to get over that issue. But Odie got cancer. And so his shoulder, he got cancer in the shoulder, and he passed, and we did everything we could to save as you can imagine, that was pull all the stops out. And so I was just very distressed about that. I thought I probably would never have a dog again. That was my feeling at the time. It was just really it was a big event for me. And so one day, about 3 or 4 months after he had passed, I got an email from a friend of mine who said, don't waste yourself on pretending that you don't belong with a dog. And she sent me a picture of a dog, and his name was, and we named him Bodie. So we had Odie and then Bodie, and Bodie was always the one that I thought Odie sent in to finish up for him. And Bodie was a kind of dog that had been he'd lived in the ghetto down in South Central Los Angeles. He had been incredibly abused. He had had a couple of dogs killed next to him by the guys in the streets but somehow he survived, and someone actually pulled him out of there. This beautiful group down in Los Angeles. And so when I got this note that said I needed to, pull my head out and get back in the game, it came with a picture of this dog. And the minute I laid eyes on that dog, I was like, yeah, that's my dog. I knew it. He was a big, beautiful boy. About a month after we got him, we had another mastiff come with him, and that pair formed the pair of dogs that we lived with for the next 8 years. They were with us for 8 or 9 years, a long time. So it was really a beautiful thing. And so Bodie was a kind of dog that he had never gotten to live in a real house and with humans before. So this was like a really exciting moment for him, So, and it lasted all 9 years. That dog was always excited about everything that happened because, he just was. And so I always remember that I would go down to the end of the hallway, and I would sit down on the stairs. And the big deal every day was we went for a walk twice a day on the beach. Took a whole mile or two every day, and the two dogs would go with me. And I would sit down and I would begin to put my shoes and socks on. And oh boy, Bodie would pick up those shoes and socks and run off with them. And I would have to chase him down. I had to get my shoes and socks back, and I have to try to put them on again. And after, this could take 10 or 15 minutes before we could get out for the walk. Now, all Bodie wanted in his whole entire life was to get out that door and walk. But all of his activity, without him realizing it, and the excitement to be active, he was doing the exact thing that got in his way of going for a walk. And so that was what he did. And I always noticed that. I would always notice that every time I would laugh. I thought it was the funniest thing that I ever saw. And then I began to notice that we as humans have that same problem. We're like a bunch of dogs at the end of the stairs, and we're running around grabbing the socks and the shoes of our opportunity to actually make a move through the door. And all we want is to move spiritually down the road. We really want to make that move, but what we are doing is actually another activity that gets in our way of doing that. So what is that activity? Well, that activity is believing that we are something. We are a defined something, an I, an ego, and that ego can actually get something. We envision the spiritual journey as an ego that is accumulating something, even if it's wisdom or seasoning or experience. That's what we believe we're doing. And by generating that kind of movement in ourselves, we're actually confirming that we're an ego. We're grabbing the socks and the shoes and running around in the hall, and the doorway's right there. And what we don't see is that our basis of existence is not an ego at all. And that what we're looking for is already with us and who we are. So we perpetuate this myth that there's something that we don't have that if we find it will change our world. A lot of people call that enlightenment or awakening, but we envision it as our story. In other words, we go, our story will eventually arrive at this place called enlightenment or awakening. And as we've talked about story, we know that the story lives in our intellect. All the story is what we extract from everything that is, and we hold it in our head. And then we think that's who we are, right? So the story is not who we are. The story is just simply our theme music. Remember I used the example of the theme music, how you put the theme music with the person and then you roll along down the road, and pretty soon you can't tell the theme music from the person because it all comes together. And pretty soon you think people come with theme music. And then you're shocked one day to find out that they don't. They actually don't come with theme music. So that story that we create is an intellectual overlay, like theme music, on our actual living. And what we really are is consciousness itself. And we already are that. And so we're really not looking for something at all. What we're doing is relaxing into the possibility of what we already are. So think about it a minute. If you think about how a story operates and how intellect operates, intellect is an exercise in contraction, right? Because what it does is it pulls things out of everything that exists and then it constructs it into a story, right? That's a contractive exercise, right? It's a defining exercise. It's a separating exercise. It's a really good exercise. When I say it, it sounds really bad, doesn't it? Because we've all learned that separation isn't good in spirituality, but actually it's a really good thing. It allows me to look at Daniel or Dilraj or Britta and say, hi, and then you can answer me back. So for us to talk to each other, for instance, we actually have to recognize ourselves as separate things. The body minds are actually operating in a separate place, but the consciousness that we are isn't that at all. One of my favorite examples, Ramesh Balsekar, who I spent a lot of time with, I love his examples because he was a businessman. He was the CEO of the Bank of India and had gone to the London School of Economics. So his examples were always, in my mind, spiritually defective, because he didn't really care about this, how it looked. He just used it. So he would compare us to can openers. He would say, look, the human being is, he says the existence that we have, humans are like can openers. He says, and what happens is you're born as a can opener, and off the end of you is this cord, and it plugs into the wall. And in order for that can opener to work, that electric current has to flow through it. And he says, and what we actually think is that we're the can opener, and we miss the fact that what we really are is the electric current. Right? He said, and when the body mind is over, we just unplug the can opener and we throw it in the trash heap. And as electricity, we continue to exist because that's what we always were and that's what we always are. but we actually think we're the can opener. Now I know that that clearly is not the most spiritual of examples, but I liked it. You know, whenever I compare people to can openers, I don't know why that makes me laugh. So the bottom line is that as you start to look at yourself, recognize that you're not the story, but what you really are is consciousness itself. Now, there's a way to begin to see how that works. And let me give you a little, I'm going to give you a little exercise or device, as we call it. At the end of every day, if you want to, pick out the thing that happened during the day that you think you are most responsible for. Doesn't matter. You know, in any given day that you have, there's going to be something that happened during the day and you go, I was responsible for that. I did that. That's how the story, that's how we create the story. And then sit down and start to put together everything that needed to happen for that event to happen. So I backed my car out of the garage, and that today, that was clearly an event that I did. Okay, great. But you know, you got up in the morning and on the way out the door, the dogs went crazy and you spent 20 minutes getting your socks and shoes on. So you went on your walk 20 minutes late. You got back 20 minutes late and you normally would have walked across the street, but because you were 20 minutes late, you had to use your car. So wait a minute, are you responsible for having to use the car? Or wait a minute, was there no other particular way to get whatever was done other than how all of the events surrounded it happened? And in that moment, you simply did what you would normally do in that moment. Had it happened any other way, could you claim that that event was wholly yours? And so start to work with that. It sounds a little hokey, but it's a really beautiful way to start to see and start to feel that you're not as in charge as you feel you are. You'll start to see that everything that you do is completely dependent on everything around it. And as you start to engage in that, take 20 minutes every day and do that. You'll be shocked over time, your experience of your own movement in life, it begins to shift. You begin to feel that, oh, I'm simply lived into every moment. I know that in every single moment, whatever is going to happen, and my response is going to be my normal response. But it's very, very difficult for me to get to a place where I believe that anything is mine. So I just want to point that out. So that exercise, and actually that's Ramesh's exercise. That's the same man that came up with the example of us as a can opener. So, but it's a really great exercise to do. Now, when you're doing that, all you're really doing is you're dissolving your intellectual hold on the story itself. That's all that's happening there. We go through life, we're taught that every moment we are autonomously authoring our own life. And then there comes a point where that autonomous authoring no longer makes sense. One feels a bondage, one feels a yearning, one knows intuitively that there's more to do and that there's must be something different in what that next movement is. And so that particular next movement is the dissolution of the belief that you live every day that says, I'm the autonomous author, and you begin to see that what you are is simply a part of consciousness itself, and that you and every other person is simply being manifested in every moment. And that starts to shift you away from that contractive intellectual holding. Because remember, we talked about how that's a contractive, that's a separating. And what you're doing is you're relaxing back in to simply being lived. A relaxation starts to happen around how you feel you are being lived. And in that relaxation, the consciousness, if you believe you're an autonomous enemy, you likely have blocked yourself off from the consciousness that you are. And all of a sudden that consciousness starts to seep in. It's like water. It looks for the hole to get in there. And it starts to now accompany you. And the moments of feeling not in bondage, at perfect peace, those begin to happen. Ramesh called those free samples, by the way. That's another Ramesh term. So, but the moments of awakening begin to happen. Now, what happens to most people, they get a moment of awakening and they go, I want to grab onto that, right? So they immediately move it back into the ego and they say, oh, the way I got there was because my ego figured out how to be awakened, right? So anytime you recognize that you're doing something contractive, you're headed in the wrong direction. I guarantee you that everybody on this call, we are experts at being out to the very edge of contracted egoism. We've already done that. We've arrived there. We really don't have to do that over and over and over again. So the direction has to be the other direction. It's a way of relaxing into what is. That's the next direction. That's the piece that happens after an ego or an individual is fully formed. That's the next piece. So that's my little introductory piece. I've got a little Paolo piece in here. So there's a saying that you either run the day or the day runs you. How is that contradiction to sitting back and letting things flow? That's a question, by the way. All right. Great question, Paolo. So here's what happens. When you're growing up, you are naturally adding pieces to the ego that you are. So in your case, I'm going to call that the Paolo story or the Allen story. So you and I can recognize what that is. So in the Allen story, I went to school like you did, and then I went to college, and then I became a financial guy, and then I went to an ashram in India, and I was doing all those things, and I was adding abilities, if you will, and pieces of ways to interact with everybody else on an ego basis, right? Well, after you add those, believe it or not, they have the ability. Remember, we talked about automatic behavior. They have the ability to simply act on their own. So if someone says to me, hey, Alan, how do you make this decision on a business question? The mind happens and it spits out stuff, and it's all said and done. There is no need to actually, believe it or not, let the day, I don't have to run the day any longer. There comes a moment where it's not necessary any longer, right? So when you ask that question, for you, it's actually a little bit going to live a little differently than for a lot of the folks that are already in the adult world, right? Because for you, you're still learning a few of those things, right? So you're going to continue to learn. But what I want you to know is that for most children, as they are learning that, they separate themselves from consciousness. Remember that electricity that drives the can opener? They separate themselves from that, right? So when I talk to you, I'm going to say, hey, listen, continue to add all those pieces, right? But I'm here to tell you, don't wall yourself off from the consciousness that you are. Recognize that there's going to be a U-turn at a certain point, and you're simply going to relax into what is. That's going to happen, right? That'll happen when that bridge is just perfectly in place. But what children don't get is the support to tell them not to separate from consciousness. In other words, as well-meaning adults in society and culture, we believe we're egos and nothing else. And all I'm telling you is you're egos and something else, that egos live on top of the electricity that makes the ego dance, that makes the can opener run. So that's all I'm telling you. So when you and I talk, I'm going to be telling you, Paolo, do what you got to do. And right? Don't forget the day will come when you no longer run the day, but you will be so perfectly in place that you can relax into the day and let the day run you, because nothing else could happen but perfection. That will come in time. Now, when you hear me talk to the adults, you remember, you know how you and I talk about teaching stories and everything, right? So remember this, because when we teach stories to children, because the story work that you and I are doing, we're going to teach it to 8-year-old kids and 58-year-old executives, right? The story thing that we're doing, it's gonna be good for both ends. That's what you and I are working on right now. Like how do you introduce both kids and adults that are executives running big companies, and we're gonna dump them in the same pool. You know, that's our plan, right? And we're gonna giggle and laugh when we do, but that's just for you and me. But anyway, so remember, there'll be a difference in how we teach that, right? For the kids, when we teach the story, we want to make sure that we support that consciousness lives underneath the story, and that's something they probably will never have heard before, right? But we're not going to tell them to relax into it until the moment comes where their development curve asks for that. I can guarantee you that the executives that we teach, those men and women, they can relax. They've been polished. They've been polished so much the chrome's coming off, right? So those folks, we can tell them the U-turn's already happened. Let us take you back here where the relaxation is now beginning to happen. And so you see, you meet when you're working with consciousness and you're working with awakening, it's kind of like a flexible thing. You don't know what's going to come at you. And so you meet each particular situation, you know, where it's living on the arc, right? So the same exact teaching, but leaned in a different way. So that's what we're, you know, that's what we're working with here. So, and I wanted all the adults to hear that, because they'll hear the difference in how I'm landing this for you and how I would land it for them, right? That you know, that's already there. You know, I've got you know, I think Janet's on today, so take Janet just as an example, because she's fun to make an example of. And if you look at her, she is this incredibly, you know, developed human with a whole bunch of ammunition ready to go. So when I talk to Janet, it's all about, I'm sending her back down the relaxation line, right? Because Janet keeps trying, probably thinking that she needs to, and I need to convince her that she's so polished, it'll happen on its own. She doesn't need to worry about it, right? So that's my pitch to her, right? My pitch to you is, okay, there's some polishing that still needs to be done, but don't lose track of the fact that we're going to make a U-turn. In other words, I want to support you in knowing there's something else going on. So that's how that particular piece lives. So I know Janet, I love his questions too, by the way. Janet said that she really likes Paolo's questions. It's always amazing to me that we think adults have such fresh points of view and more intellectual and can discuss stuff. I'm going to tell a little story about Paolo and I. You guys will probably enjoy it. So I wrote a little story called The Wisdom Pond. And the Wisdom Pond had to do with how warriors would go to war, but they would take a bucket. And when they would take this bucket, it would be full of water, because in the ancient days, the elders taught them to, when they were done doing what they were supposed to do, which was their campaign out on the battlefield, that they needed to nourish the battlefield, that was an absolute requirement of being a warrior. You weren't really a warrior unless you were engaged in the support and happiness of your own community. But here's the thing. The water came from a wisdom pond, and it was tucked up back beyond in the little village. And what would happen is that the warriors would have to go up, and up back in the back, lived all these crinkled old women and men, looked a lot like me. And what would happen is they knew how to get the water out of the wisdom pond, because the warriors, they were in action, and they thought they were being the authors of their own story. But those older folks up there knew that the only way the water would be in the bucket, the water would jump in the bucket, was when there was a recognition that they really were one thing with the water. That was the magic of the water. And they would place the water in the buckets. And if you were really lucky, you could, after you were a warrior for time immemorial, you might graduate and get to be one of the old folks up around the wisdom pond. So notice how I cast that. Old people are wise, blah, blah, blah. Well, I met Paolo, and I started to think, well, you know, that story really kind of lives in a way where the old people are the wise folks. And I met this young man at 11, and he's already wise. So I asked Paolo, I said, hey, listen, what's the version of this for an 11-year-old? By the way, you still haven't written that and gotten it back to me. But anyway, I wanted to know, you know, how an 11-year-old would cast that same story, right? Because I cast it, I'm 67 years old. So I made it a thing about, you know, the old people. And of course, that's how an old person would think of it. But how's an 11-year-old think about it, right? How does wisdom happen in that world? I wanted to see that story. So I got ready to send that story, and that story was buried in a chapter of stuff about consciousness. Right? I mean, I'm writing a book, so this is a chapter out of the book. And I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, man, should I just extract this story and send it over to Powell or whatever? And finally I said, nonsense. I sent him the whole thing. And guess what comes back? Paulo loved the whole thing. He didn't like just the story. He read the whole stupid thing. And I thought to myself, okay, you know, there's a thinking here, right? Remember, the intellect, the Allen story still has its play in this world. And the Allen story had this thing divided up where, you know, young wisdom probably wasn't interested in all of the, you know, kind of philosophical and the stuff that talked about consciousness. It was only interested in the story. But when I sent Paolo the whole thing, he gobbled it up like it was, you know, reading for anybody any day. And so there was an incredible learning that came out of that, right? So recognize that we have a prejudice in our world that says when you're speaking about, you know, consciousness and some of these, maybe we would call them esoteric, that actually they're easily penetrated by an 11-year-old, right? Powell handled it like it was no, in fact, he might have done better than I did writing it, to be honest with you. So the reality is you have to kind of take a look at that and say, how do we unwind that? You know, because your teaching is going to come out of your story, right? It's going to have some of that in it. And so you're always looking to go, where are the pieces where the assumptions that live in the Allen story leak into the teaching? That's just the way it works, right? So, and in this case, what we can see is that Paolo comes in here with these really amazing questions, and we get to you know, talk about those. So, all right, let's see, what's the next one? Oh, so this is Trey Sean. How do you make decisions from a place of no judgment and letting go of one's ego? So what happens, Trey Sean, in the ego is that the belief that we are an autonomous author of our own existence, it walls us off from consciousness itself. And so the intuitive suggestiveness of consciousness gets walled off from the thinking, right? So what begins to happen is that the egoic thinking now gets completely based on the story and the intellectual contractions and the intellectual you know, stories that we've made up, and it circulates in and among itself. Now, if you really want to watch how that works at the extreme, go watch any country and its politics, because that's a total, you know, recirculation of intellectual ideas supposedly in service of humanity. I have yet to meet anybody who thinks that politicians somehow or another find themselves in service of humanity. You notice in the beginning, they come out in service, And then once they're dumped into the pool of politics, they begin to get into that recycling. And so all that's really going on in politics is this belief that the intellectual concepts are actually what is needed. And there's a loss of access to intuition. All right. So I hope this is making sense to you, Trey Sean. So the question is, in your mind, when you don't let go of ego is actually going to execute, if you will. If you think about it that way, the words are going to come out of Trey Sean's mouth. The mind is going to gussy up what the intuition is suggesting. But the intuition is the piece that if you let it in, it will make the suggestion that needs to happen. It will move one in a way where the thinking can then construct itself, right? So again, more relaxation. Now, where you are in life, believe it or not, you can start to play with that. There's a lot of how you've arrived where you're already developed. And so relaxing into letting the intuition guide that is going to be the next step for you. That's a good piece. That's a really good piece for you to play with. Now, here's the thing about life I want you to understand. We really think that every decision is so critically important. The ego wants you to think that. Why? Because then the ego gets to be really important. If every decision is so important, but here's the kind of underbelly secret of life. How often do you have to make a second, third, and fifth decision about something because the first one didn't work? So how important could that first decision be if you have to remake them all the time? So one way to change the nature of how you see your life is to see that decisions can be remade, that there's a gear in a car. You ever get in a car, you ever notice there's a thing called reverse? Well, we have a reverse gear and humans hate to use it because they think something's wrong with that. But actually reverse is really a great gear. It's a wonderful gear, right? So I just talked about that in the delivery of what it is that I do. If the Allen story actually is funneling something out there and it's not noticed, then it simply gets missed. Whereas if I can put this into reverse, put it in reverse, recapture what the intuition wants recaptured, and boom, down the road you go. So Trey Sean, it's relaxation and then recognizing you likely have learned that every decision is critical. Start to see that it's not. So let me talk to you a little bit about that in terms of business. I started to notice when I first started doing business that we would go out and we would start companies and we would have a budget. We would say, here's what the plan is, right? And what I noticed was about 4 or 5 things on the plan, and we would have budgets and we would spend the money and we got nothing done. They didn't work. And so we had to find new money and do something different. And pretty soon I was noticing that happened in every single company. So the plan of starting a company by its very nature included a whole bunch of stuff that wasn't going to work. And in fact, we were going to have to put it in reverse and we were going to have to rethink it. And we're going to have to figure it out again. And that was the nature of starting a company. That's just how starting a company worked. When I started to let that be the way it was, all of a sudden things worked a lot better. Why? Because I and other people around me were now in tune with the fact we didn't get bothered by the fact that we had a marketing budget for $10,000 and we spent $10,000 and nothing worked. We already knew there was a really good chance that we were going to have to figure out after we spent the money supposedly for the thing to do the thing again. That's how business works. We knew that. Well, life works that way too. A lot of your decisions that you make, you can simply put it in reverse, go back and say, wait a minute, let's reconsider, because obviously that first one didn't work. So when you say, how do you make decisions from a place of no judgment and letting go of one's ego, relax, let the intuition advise you, and recognize that decisions aren't mission critical every time. If you can do that, you're absolutely rocking. So there you go. So Amir's question, he wants to help adults tap into their inner child and go on more bike rides. And Amir, thank you. Adults should go on more bike rides. They, hi.
Hi.
I love you, baby. I'm talking about your question. I'm talking about your question. So anyway. Oh, let me mute you down so we're not, okay, good. We're back. So Amir, here's what happens is that adults think that all of their thinking is really important. You know that, right? They think, you listen to adults and they're always talking to each other and they're telling each other all sorts of ideas, right? And you're saying to yourself, why can't I get these guys to go get on a bike and have a ride with me? Isn't that what you're saying? Yeah, of course. You know what, of course. And so, believe it or not, in a certain way, riding a bike and being physical and living in that place is really a way to relax. And it's a way to see that your mind can relax. So when I was talking to your brother, Trey Sean, about relaxing, that's what I'm talking about, right? So next time you go ride your bike, you need to get Trey Sean out there with you on that bike and have him ride that bike while he makes his next big decision and ask him how that works, right? That's exactly it. How can you ride a bike and not basically be relaxed? You got to be, you're playing, right? You're having a good time. And when that happens, you can't be, your decisions are going to look different, right? So we're going to make Trey Sean ride bikes every time he makes a big decision for a while, just to see how that looks, right? But that's a perfect question. It's the child's ability to play, which Amir is talking to me about, right? That brings relaxation. All right. So I like to go out. I think everybody knows that I like to go out and splash in puddles. Do you like to do that, Amir? Do you like to splash in puddles?
Yes, that's
Do you like to splash in puddles when the puddles are out? You like to go splash? Yeah. So that's my favorite thing. So every time it rains, I go out. I'm a crazy old man, and I go out and I splash in the puddles because that's my favorite thing to do, right? And then it's amazing to me when I'm splashing in the puddles, all sorts of new ideas and new things come in that I never thought were going to be there before, right? So it's like this beautiful moment of relaxation, right? Play. There are two things that kids do. One is play, and one is being curious. And adults leave those behind. They lose they start not asking, what they think there are stupid questions and there aren't. So they quit asking questions and they quit playing. Right. So as adults, the more of that we do, believe it or not, that's another really good, what we call device. And all a device is, Amir, is a thing you do to create something different, right? So riding a bike, everybody should be out riding their bikes. Absolutely. There you go. All right. All right, Julian. Paolo isn't your standard 11-year-old. It'll be fascinating to see how much of it would resonate with these peers. You're right. Paolo isn't the standard 11-year-old. That said, I would bet my last dollar that Paolo could connect with any other 11-year-old really well. So that's the piece that I would depend on is that in the grouping itself, that Paolo has likely the capability. I'm thinking he does, having watched what I watch and watch how he interacts with everybody, that he could create that possibility in a group. I think in a way, in your question is the same doubt that I was living in, which is how does an 11-year-old, really do what I think they could do in terms of being on the spiritual journey. But the reality is Paolo's doing well. And when I look around in my life, one of the stories I tell a lot is when my son was about 12 years old, and he came to me and he said, "Dad, I want to talk to you about a couple things." He said, "I'm looking out there," and he says, "it seems to me that if you know something, that you know something." And I said, "Yeah, that's true." And he says, and if you don't know something, you don't know something. And I said, well, that's the other side of the same thing. I said, that's true. And he says, and everything in between is belief. And I said, yeah. And he said, Dad, isn't belief just stuff you make up to make yourself feel better about not knowing? And I said, absolutely. So I remember reading entire books by folks like Sigmund Freud and all of these people. And in one simple conversation, my 12-year-old boy described the entirety of belief psychology. And I was absolutely sure that all of those books that the adults had written with all of the big fancy words and all were probably really well done, and we should probably all read them. But the other thing you could do is talk to my 12-year-old boy for about 5 sentences, and you would come out with the same result. So in looking at it, I think the reason I was pointing it out is I have a suspicion that we underestimate 11-year-olds generally. That's my belief. And I will grant you that Paolo is a special one, but I also will tell you he's an 11-year-old. Make no mistakes about it. In my interactions with him, Paolo's 11, right? Paolo, you're an 11-year-old, right? You're doing the 11-year-old stuff. So no doubt about that. So anyway, all right. Okay, here's Yasmin's question. How to help one rebuild their self-esteem, but they are redundant and aren't willing to change, right? So think of it this way, Yasmin. What we normally do is we try to help by pointing out to somebody that this is what they can do, right? But I already know that what you're doing is you're saying, if I can find the beauty in every human being, which I can, because that's your gift, the gift that, yeah, everybody, so they know, Yasmin's gift is she sees the beauty in every single human. And if you can find that in them and have them experience it, right, that will shift them. You know that. And that's what you're doing. That's what you're up to, right? So here's what I want you to grab onto just a little bit. Sometimes telling somebody or explaining to somebody, that's not the teaching way that works for them. What does work for them, though, is to feel it in you, because then they feel themselves and who you are. So sometimes what you have to do is not speak a lot, not teach a lot, and simply be with, whatever that is. Now, when you get your dog, right, you're going to practice that a lot, because dogs don't talk a lot. So the only way to be with a dog, right, is to share the essence of who you are. And that's all you do, right? That's all you do. So my dog right now, I've got a dog, her name's McKenna, and McKenna is half cat, half thoroughbred. She's just an amazing dog, but a hard dog to understand. But she wants to be in the middle of everything, but she's so skittish that and people would treat her in such a way before I got her that she was always scared. Well, now I go shopping and I come home and I get down on the floor in the kitchen and I'm putting all the little things away, right? And I invite her in. She's got her head under the cupboard and we're putting stuff away. And that's just how we do what we do, right? So this dog is feeling in me what it always had in itself, but had become afraid to express. Because when she expressed that loving connection, people wanted her to be a different way. And so they would punish her, correct her, whatever. They use that thinking, teaching stuff. And this dog's not about thinking and teaching. This dog is all about being loved. And if you love her, she's your constant companion always. She's going to even help you put I don't know if she helps you put the groceries away, but she's sure going to put her nose into everything that's happening, which is one of my, my wife says it takes me 3 times longer to put the groceries away, but I'm really happy doing it. Well, of course, my dog's helping me extend the experience, right? But it's just, it's a being with, right? So all you have to do is take the beauty of how you see the beauty in everybody and sit in. You can feel that, right? If you stop and close your eyes, you can feel that, right? That's broadcasting from you. People can feel that in you. We call that presence. So you're a person of presence, and they can feel that in you, and that's going to be healing and inviting and magnetic. And so start to lean into the nonverbal, because that's probably going to be where you live a lot. The part about teaching them or bringing them along, which is more of the way I do it, likely is not going to be as much your way as the simply being and magnetizing. And I can tell you that and if you have healers around you, talk to them, because healers, when you start to talk about being a conduit for consciousness, healers already do that when they heal. So when you're working with a healer, you're just trying to expand them into seeing that they're a conduit for everything, not just healing. So if you're around healers, ask them how that moves through them. So you got lots of folks around you that'll help you with that one. Did that help at all?
Yeah, that did. Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. You're welcome. All right. Thank you. Shared so much. Let's see if I can find a question here. Yeah. So basically, Julian jumped back in and said, so Paolo could be the bridge for them. Yeah. So we're back to talking about kids and how we have a tendency to underestimate them. But yeah, Paolo could be a bridge. And some of the kids that don't appear as brilliant as Paolo could be a bridge for him into some of the pieces that he might not be touching yet as well. That one works both ways. So I think that it's just the watching of that. Yasmin is vortexing for her dog big time. I know. I want everybody to understand I'm going to be unabashedly obvious about this. So Yasmin evidently needed an ally, so I have been converted. And so I want everybody to know that I'm in her corner and I'm pulling for the dog. So if anybody wants to know where I stand on the subject of Yasmin and the dog, Alan's in. So much in that he's rooting for it hard. So I know that may make my relationship with Sabrina a bit dicey, but hey, I'm an abuelo, I'm not a parent. So let's see what's next. When people say, look at the past and change the future, how can we make that decision even though we are not there yet? So Paolo, when you sit and you just feel how you are, can you feel the love in yourself? So if all you knew was that you were love, you were consciousness, and that's what you were, how much do you need to worry about how you render it or land it or make it happen? Do you really need to worry about that? No. So because if you and I just said what the world needs is more love, and I can feel that I am love, all you have to do is go put yourself in the world and relax into what wants to happen. Right? Remember I told the story about the dumpster? Do you remember my dumpster story? And I'm helping my best friend get bottles out of the dumpster because I was in the middle of a big executive meeting and I'm going to lunch early, and I get down to the bottom floor, and my friend who collects bottles, he's a homeless fellow, his back hurt that day. So here I am in my suit and I climb in the dumpster and I'm handing the bottles out to him. Right? The executives who had been in the meeting, they come following out and they see the guy who was leading their meeting. He's in the dumpster handing bottles out to the homeless dude. Now that's probably not something you see every day, right? And they asked me later, they said, why did you do that? And I said, what's the answer, Paolo? He's my friend. Isn't that what friends do? So I was sitting on my love, and a moment came where my love wanted to be expressed. And the way it got expressed was by handing bottles out of a dumpster down in an old parking lot in the old part of Los Angeles. That's where I was, right? And that's how that happened. And that happened all by itself. And it really didn't matter what the executives thought of it or if it was proper or whether I should be there, all the rest of it, because, all I was sitting on love. And one of my friends needed help. His back hurt that day. He couldn't climb into the dumpster and I could. So you know how it is to, like your two kids, you need to do something, one of them can't and the other does, that's how you do. That's called teamwork. It's called friendship. That's what we do. So if you think about it, you'll find yourself doing some of the craziest things. It's not all about what you think will help. It's actually about you just simply being you. That's the first, remember I talked about in the very beginning, we think we're the story and we have to get something, and actually we're the consciousness itself. The story is being made up after. All we have to do is sit in love and consciousness. If we do that, all what needs to happen is going to happen. And all of my questions have been that way. Yasmin's question, rather than teaching from the intellect, what do I tell her? Sit in your heart and let it broadcast. All of the answers are today. You notice that they're all going back to that same place. Pay attention to the electricity, not the can opener. All right. Lachey, let's see. I was wondering if you have any advice around maintaining momentum in day-to-day life, maintaining focus and protecting your energy. Yeah, so I do, Lachey. Here's the crazy thing. If you are absolutely authentic to who you are, which is, and you heard me talk to Yasmin about just simply falling into, I told her what her authenticity was. Now she could do a better job, but I took the initiative today. But what I was trying to do is have her fall into her authenticity and broadcast who she is. When you do that, you as an individual, as a story, the Lachey story sits on top of consciousness itself. And there isn't really anything to protect, right? And I'll tell you why. Because the story that you are doesn't need protecting. And in fact, you can imagine the crazy things they say about me, people that do what I do. So I already know that the story that they make up about me and you, there's nothing you and I can do about that. And that's what you're protecting from, right? So here's my advice. Forget that stuff. Now, it's hard to do because you've been taught to pay attention to all those stupid stories. So you can start working on that right now. You can start going, well, wait a minute. Somebody said that, but I know it's not true, right? So there was an old fellow in India, his name was Osho, and he would say, it's really interesting how humans work. If I tell you you're a green goat, you're like, well, I know I'm not a green goat. He said, but there's certain words that are useful in human language that glues everybody to it. So I'm going to use one, shut your ears, Paolo, and Amir. But if someone calls you an asshole, you're like, no, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you aren't, it's the same as being called a green goat, right? And we all know that you're not. So the thing is that in your own self, the mind is what you're thinking you need to use in order to protect the story of who you are. And the reality is, if you just simply broadcast who you are, you're going to be fine. And one of the things you talked about, maintaining momentum, you don't have to do that. It's like consciousness, when you sit on top of it, it's like having a full tank of gas at all moments. And some of the momentum will be quiet and slow, and some of the momentum will be fast and furious. Both of those happen, but that gas is pumping it into you at all times. You never have to worry about having enough. So my situation about 6 months ago, I decided I could just feel there was a call to get back into the world. And I spent 3 years, not really all that active. I built a house. I moved to Hawaii. I was playing with the dogs. I wasn't doing much. And all of a sudden I could just feel it. And so I created this thing called the Spiritual MBA because that was the next thing that wanted to happen in my world. And I began to speak again. And here I am now at 67 years old, and you're 20. I don't feel any different than I did at 20 years old in terms of the momentum that's here. Now you can probably watch me. I'm pretty active here for an old man. I'm here, I'm present, and I'm on fire. And that's just how the Allen story seems to want to work. And I know I look at you and I crack up because I'm going, she's here, she's present, she's on fire. That's who you are. So that's who we are. We're those kind of folks. Remember, I'm the oldest of 5 too. I know where we live in the string of, so like the oldest kid is always, here, present, and on fire. That seems to be how they want the oldest kid to be. And we get our arms around it and we go for it, right? Plenty of gas for that. Don't worry about it. You will never be left empty. Just fall into the authenticity of who you are, and don't waste your energy trying to protect. There's nothing to protect. And over time, it'll be hard at first because people will say things and do things. And especially on social media and stuff, oh my goodness, the nonsense that people say, right? So in a way, that's going to be a test of fire to see if you can see that they own the story and you live the story. And their opinions about your living the story really aren't that relevant. In fact, they're not relevant at all. Just keep living the story. Doggedly live the story, right? And lots of support around you, but doggedly live the story. Your momentum will never go away. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. All right. You see. Okay. I think I've talked to every single question today, pretty much, huh? If there's anything anybody wants me to do before I jump off, I'll answer it. Thank you for the these are my daughter and my son make fun of me when I wear these glasses, so Paolo, so I insist on wearing them. So that's that. Okay. I've got a Sabrina. How do I deal with feeling like I am jumping on a trampoline, having fun, and then somebody comes along and their primary intention is to bounce me off? What story do I recite in order to maintain my bounce? They seem to want to bounce me off no matter what excuse is used at the time. So Sabrina recognized that the activity of life is the ego continuing to resist the consciousness that births it. That's always happening. So you've heard the comment, misery loves company. I don't know that the ego recognizes that it lives in more misery than consciousness itself. But the bottom line is that folks live a separate life. Because they live a separate life, they feel separation. Whenever you feel separation, you feel insecure. So whenever you feel insecure, you basically try to make everybody else's story conform to yours. That's what you do in order to feel less secure, right? That's the activity of feeling less secure. And along comes Sabrina, right? Who's got more energy than we can even imagine, who is in service and doing her thing and all of the stuff that Sabrina does. And frankly, if you're in the ego space, that's just damn irritating, It's uncalled for. And our job is to lob a few hand grenades in there and see if we can get you to quit it. So that's what's going on there. That's what's happening. So what's the story? The story that you need to say, or the story that you need to recognize, is where's the fuel from the inside? Because are you going to pay attention to consciousness itself? Or are you going to pay attention to the yap dogs of existence who don't like it that you're actually in this space that you are? That's the egoic version, right? So inside. It's what Paolo asked, how do I do what I do? And I said, where did I send him back? I told him, you feel love, don't you? So I'm telling him, go to the inside and feel love. Don't worry about what's happening. The spiritual community wants to save the world, but they have no idea what love is. So what are their chances of saving the world? Why don't we let them be in love and we'll let consciousness save the world? That's my suggestion, because you'll get put into motion. You really will. So inside. And I know you're like me, it's going to take a while for you to feel less sensitive about letting what happens on the outside happen. All right. So remember that I'm not telling you this is easy. But the thing is that I'm sitting here and you've got 5 others that are sitting in this little thing with me. And if you ever run into that and you're really getting flustered, ask them, what should I do right now? And you're going to have a 5-person satsang in there and go, remember, go inside. They heard what I said, right? They're going to tell you what to do. All you got to do is ask them. They're right there. Got a whole chorus. They might even do it. And, it might be musical and in harmony for all I know. So just remember, you got 5 voices. You guys have that ability. A lot of people don't have it. So all you got to do is go in there. They're going to tell you, Mom, you're paying attention to the outside. What's on the inside? And then Powell will say something brilliant like, hey, Mom, can you just feel the love? And you're going to crack up and tears will come down your eyes because it's so funny. Your kids will be doing that. So, all right. So yeah, Julian, Sabrina, they're miserable and they want you to be like them. That's another way of saying same thing. Thank you, Julian. I appreciate that. Okay. If life and humanity ended today, how can we make sure that we leave our mark in a permanent one? There's no such thing, Paolo. No such thing. Life is like when you watch the birds fly over. Have you ever noticed? Ask yourself the next time you watch the birds fly over if you can see the trail that they leave behind. I mean, really concentrate. See if you can find the trail they leave behind. But they don't, do they? And that's what you and I are doing. We're love here in the moment. We don't leave a trail behind. Don't worry about leaving a mark. It's not necessary. You're already leaving a mark, I'm sure. So. Okay, what are some of the things that you often enjoy sharing during satsang, but at times do not get asked to do so? Well, I told the story of the dogs today, and I thought about it before I told it. I said, I'm going to tell them the whole story of Odie and Bodhi and the whole story. So I enjoy telling stories that probably aren't as pointed a lot of times. And I like to tell the whole story just because I enjoy that human experience, right? That's the story. So when you guys sit with me and I'm not in satsang, you're going to hear me telling the stupidest, dumb stories you'll ever hear. My favorite thing is telling stories. I guess you probably understand why I relate so well to your children, but that's my favorite thing. Julian has promised me a whole bunch of time where I get to sit and tell stories with him because he loves to tell stories too. So I already have that promise. So when I come there, I'm gonna be there to tell all sorts of stories. So and I will do that. And so there you go. And what's my favorite story of all time? The Red Hatchet. That's the most Alan of all stories, the crazy kid that went out and sold a gazillion damn boxes because he really wanted a red hatchet bad.
Abuelo.
Yeah.
Just before you move on, let me get the red hatchet to show to everyone.
So you want me to tell them the story behind that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Paolo is a storyteller, and his favorite story is the red hatchet story. And so at one point in time, he asked me if I still had it. I didn't. I long ago lost the red hatchet. However, I found a red hatchet that was exactly the same. I couldn't even tell the difference. And I thought that where it belonged was with the next budding storyteller in the world. And so I took that red hatchet and I sent it to London, and I told the people it was a toy and not a real hatchet, which it is. And somehow or another, it got to Paolo. So Paolo is now the storyteller who is in possession of the red hatchet. And I think you're going to show it to us all, isn't it? Aren't you going to show us the red hatchet? Okay, let's see the red hatchet. Or you want to say something?
We're just going to get it. My sister's getting it for me.
Okay.
She's in guard of she's in charge of the safekeeping, Abuela. Because when I sleep, Abuela, I sleep like this.
Yeah.
I sleep like this. So with the red hatchet next to me, it's gonna. I won't be up in the morning. So my older sister is in charge of the safekeeping,
Yeah, so that's
and we're gonna get a case to put in as well.
And if you
that
ask,
way we can sleep with it.
If somebody asks me next time, I'll do a full rendering. Today is probably not the day, but I'll do a full rendering of the Red Hatchet story. so here's a funny thing. I never told that story in any kind of in any kind of setting like this. And I realized that when Paolo told me it was his favorite story, and it's my favorite story too. I just never had told it before. Who knew? I used all sorts of other stories. So I did a full storytelling here a few times back of the red hatchet story. And now Paolo is the holder of the red hatchet itself. So when it arrives here, you're gonna, do we have it? Here it is. Here it is. I want you to know it's beat up. It's perfect. Okay, show him the red hatchet. There it is. Now I want everybody to know, if you take a close look at that, because the you can see it's all beat up. Yeah, just like my original red hatchet was. So that's the that's the original red hatchet. That's I have Justine looking in because she hasn't seen it yet. So
I'm just peeking.
Oh, yeah.
that's
So
it.
it's 60 years old.
Yep, that's
Isn't
right.
It, a word?
It is. Yep, it's absolutely right. Right at
Same
that
age
level.
as my nan.
Yep. And she's younger than me. I'm older. I'm older than that. So. So there you go. That's my favorite.
I've also got the letter here as well.
Yep. So I'll tell you what, next time, let's do it. Well, I'll tell the whole story of the red hatchet, and then we'll have you read the letter. You want to do that? We'll do a whole thing.
Sure.
Okay. Everybody will love it. The next European Satsang will be the red hatchet Satsang. I'll announce it then. We'll do the red hatchet story. Paolo read the letter, and then I will make that somehow or another a pointer for spiritual movement. I'm sure I can do it if I try. So, all right, everybody. Okay, I love you all. Thank you for your time. The questions were awesome today. I hope everybody got a lot out of this. I will see you all in 2 weeks when we do the European edition of Satsang again. I will, we'll get some pictures. Go to Paolo's page, because you've got a whole, post those pictures for me somewhere and let us all know where they are, because I've got he's got all sorts of pictures of him holding the red hatchet. So that way you'll get to see it. All right, everybody. Much love, and we'll see you all next time. Bye.